Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and welcome to Quick Learner, my Arkham Horror the Card Game YouTube channel. If you're new here, please take a look around. I do a lot of videos every week, usually something to do with the gameplay on Wednesdays. I've got scenario reviews, usually are up on Fridays, and then something else that is kind of fun and interesting on Sundays or so. Not always those days of the week, but I try to keep that kind of a schedule. So, welcome, subscribe, like, comment, all that, of course. But today I'm doing a little bit of a fun video that I think everyone can relate to because I'm talking about the core set encounter cards. And specifically, I'm talking about reusing the core set encounter cards. Now, you've bought into a living card game, and you buy the core set and it comes with a bunch of cool things that you want to reuse over and over again. When it comes to player cards, you of course are free to do that. But then when you start buying some new campaigns, you'll notice every now and then that they'll instruct you to get some core set encounter cards to mix in. Now, there's quite a few of these encounter sets, and these are denoted by the little symbol in the middle of the card that you can see there. These are three of the most common encounter sets: the Ancient Evils set, the Striking Fear set, and the Chilling Cold set. These tend to show up in, I think almost all of them are in every single campaign. There's a list somewhere about how many times these encounter sets show up, and I think it's over 20 different scenarios across all of the Arkham Horror the Card Game campaigns currently as of 2024. So you are very familiar, if you played the game a lot, with all of these cards. Of course, the Striking Fear one also includes Dissonant Voices and Rotting Remains, and the one with Crypt Chill, Chilling Cold, also has Obscuring Fog, but just throwing these out here as some examples. So yeah, the promise of getting to reuse and remix some of the cards that were part of the core set, that promise is fulfilled with these cards. But the truth is, there's a lot more cards that came in the core set that you hardly ever see. So on one end of the spectrum, you're seeing a lot of these cards. At the other end of the spectrum, there's some cards that you've only used once in the core set itself, or maybe one other time in another scenario later on. So the purpose of this video is, what are the encounter sets that I'd like to see reused in some upcoming campaigns? So what are the ones that I wish came out of the box more often? All right, so the first one I'll talk about are the ghouls. Now, this one actually shows up in about 7 different scenarios, which is a pretty low number, honestly. And they've gotten a little bit better about using these in the last couple of campaigns. I think there's one scenario apiece in Scarlet Keys and Feast of Hemlock Vale. It showed up in 2 different scenarios in the Dream Eaters, but unfortunately, it was kind of a punchline in both scenarios. The ghouls in one of the Dream Eater scenarios are, I won't give any spoilers, but they're basically non-existent threats. And I sort of get it. The enemies themselves are the most basic of basic enemies you could even think of. There's really nothing on them that makes them interesting. There's just 2 health and 3 health. But you know what? With new campaigns, they can do something else, like put on an agenda or act that each ghoul enemy gains +1 fight or +1 health. They've done something like this with the Swarm of Rats enemies in some of the campaigns, where they've made them a little more of an interesting threat in the theme of the scenario that it's in. So I don't think that this is impossible. Now, the other thing to think about is the third card in this set, Grasping Hands, of which there are 3 copies, is kind of a standout because for a long time, agility was not tested in the encounter deck very often. Instead, we got basically Rotting Remains, which is the same as this card, testing 3 willpower for each point you fail by, take 1 horror. We got that analog all over the place, but not often the Grasping Hands treachery itself. Sometimes in recent campaigns, we've gotten some other version of this where you test agility and take damage or something else for each point you fail by. But people have often speculated that the reason we never saw Grasping Hands is because the ghouls themselves are part of this encounter set and they don't make sense in every campaign. You're not going to have ghouls come out of Antarctica. Maybe they won't be in... what else could they be in? I guess we have the Forgotten Age, right? They're not going to be in a place like that. So Grasping Hands basically gets cast aside because they don't want to include all of these cards too. I don't really buy it, though. We have a lot of examples of encounter sets that get split up. Maybe not a lot, but it's mostly the Midnight Mask's Treacheries, the False Lead, and Hunting Shadow, which are specifically instructed in the setup for scenarios. Just use these cards, the rest of the Midnight Mask's encounter set, leave it aside. So while I don't think they like to do the whole just pick out this one card and then don't use the other ones as part of setup, they can do it. And they shouldn't be scared to do it in this case. So that's one way they could salvage using this set. But honestly, I kind of like seeing the Ghoul minions and the Ravenous Ghoul because I hardly ever get to pull them out of the box. And, you know, maybe there's something cool they can do to make them more relevant. All right, that's the Ghouls. Number 2 is actually related. How about the Ghoul Priest itself? If you've, of course, played the core set, you know that at the very beginning of the tutorial campaign as it is, the mini-boss is the Ghoul Priest. If we're bringing back ghouls, why not bring the Ghoul Priest too? This is a pretty beefy and enemy and a scary threat for your very first scenario. And what would it be like to encounter the Ghoul Priest again in some other campaign, especially if you don't have Lita Chandler on your side? Suddenly this is a really tough enemy, right? We don't often run into a 4-fight, 4-evade enemy with Retaliate in scenario 1, especially with 2 damage and 2 horror. But I like that victory too. So maybe this could show up in some other, scenario like 3 or 4. It might be a fun little boss to have to fight. Now, the reason I brought this up in the first place was my original plan for this number 2 here was going to be just the Your House card. This card I have very rarely played with, and it shows up in the Midnight Masks, so second scenario of the core set, only sometimes. I won't give away why it shows up, but I then put this on the slide and read it. It says when the Ghoul Priest spawns, spawn it here instead of its normal location. Well, it doesn't make any sense to use this card if you don't also have the Ghoul Priest, so it would be a lot of fun to include both of these in some future scenario. All right, number 3 are the Arkham Woods. Now, they do show up in one scenario in the Circle Undone, the first one, but these are a whole set of Arkham Woods locations used primarily in that third scenario in the core set, and they're all pretty neat. These are just 3 of them that are like okay. There's one that's absolutely awful, the twisting something or other that makes you take a intellect test. If you can't pass that, you don't ever leave the location. Maybe take that one out. Like I said before, they shouldn't be afraid to say use all of these, but not that one. In fact, they do that, as I'll bring up on the next slide too. So I like to see these more often. They are Arkham Woods, so I guess you have to have a campaign that takes place in Arkham, but throw them in. Save the card budget for a new campaign for some other new exciting effects that you're going to use in that scenario too, and let us reuse some of these older cards that don't get very much play. All right. Number 4 is sort of similar. There are some other locations in Arkham, the city, that we rarely get to see over and over again too. And you might say, hey, didn't we revisit Arkham in a couple of their scenarios in the game? Yeah, but in the Circle Undone, which is one of those, all of the locations are totally different. You don't use the core set ones at all. Now, the other scenario that does, which is in Threads of Fate in the Forgotten Age, you actually don't use any of these. They force you to pick a few other locations, but you don't use Southside, you don't use the graveyard, and you don't use this downtown. You use a different downtown. So why not use some of these cards in a future scenario that takes place in Arkham, the city? We always want to go back to Arkham, and I suspect that the next campaign is going to have us do that if it's gangster related, as they hinted at the end of Feast of Hemlock Vale. So I want to have the graveyard again. I want to have this, South Side, downtown, all the rest of them. East Town is one of my favorite locations in the game. But let us use these more often than just the kind of 2 scenarios in the game. There is one other one. I think the side scenario or challenge scenario for Agnes Baker also uses these locations, but I'm not sure if it uses all of the ones from Midnight Masks or just the ones that were used in Threads of Fate. So I'm not sure on that, but I'd love to see it in more than just a few campaigns. All right, last one, and probably If you're paying attention, this is kind of obvious which one's left, and it is the Agents of encounter sets. So I've got 4 different ones that are up here on the screen. These were originally used in the Devour Below. At the beginning, you are told to randomize between the 4 different agents of whoever the ancient one is, and pick those. You don't even know what they are. You shuffle them in the encounter deck, and then you might see these cards. So all of them have been seen in other campaigns, but just not very much. The first one, the Relentless Dark Young, also comes with 3 goat spawns, and that was seen again in the first scenario of the Circle Undone, and that's it. We've never seen them in any other scenario, and you never even see the Relentless Dark Young unless you're playing 4-player. So I've never seen this card. It's a cool card. Seems like a really interesting enemy to have to deal with, and yet it's sitting in my box. It's been sitting in the core set box for years. I want to be able to use it, so please let me use it. The Young Deep one, and there's Dreams of Relia, I think, is the other card that comes with it. Also is seen in, of course, the Devour Below, but also in 2 scenarios of the Innsmouth Conspiracy. It's just like 2 early ones. I think it's the 1st and 3rd scenarios, and then that's it. I'd like to see this guy some more. It is part of Agents of Cthulhu, so speculation is that when we get Cthulhu finally, we should get this set. But until then, you know, figure out a way to put some random deep ones in a scenario. It would be fun. The Agents of Hastur set, which includes Screeching Byaki and Drawing or something, the sign, I don't remember. It's the one that instructs you to get a madness weakness out. This is a tough enemy, and it shows up a couple times, of course, in the Path to Carcosa, and then never again. I get that the theming here with the yellow sign, you kind of want to just limit it to Carcosa, but it's a Byaki. Byakis can show up in other campaigns too. Last one. This one we've actually seen in the most different campaigns. So the Yithian Observer and its related Offer of Power, I think, is in obviously the core set, shows up a couple times in Dunwich, and then once more in the Forgotten Age. And then that's it. I think this is a pretty cool enemy too, and they made a good... It's shown up in scenarios where it makes a lot of sense. But why not use it again? I think it would be neat to have them show up somewhere else. Notably, 3 of these sets have victory point enemies, and, you know, if there's nothing Arkham Horror, the card game players like more than some more victory points. All right, that is it for this list. I've just noticed that it says number 4 here. It's number 5, of course. But that's also most of the encounter sets in the core itself. So I think they do a good job of using a lot of the other cards. You know, the rats show up, I think, a normal number of times, but everyone's so used to, especially those first 3 that I gave you, the Striking Fear, the Ancient Evils, and Chilling Cold, that we kind of forget that all these other cards just don't leave the binder too often. So thank you so much for watching. If you have some more ideas of cards that you'd like to see repeated and reused a little bit more from the core set, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to see cards reused from other expansions as well. That's just not possible with the model of the game, but it would be neat to be able to get to some more mileage out of those cards too. Otherwise, it's, again, just cardboard sitting in a box. I'll see you in the next video. Please check out other things on the channel. In the meantime, I'm sure there's something that will be interesting and fun and educational to you in the meantime to watch.